Hello, and welcome to Bedtime Past Stories. Tonight we're going to slow everything down and travel gently into the ancient past. Before we begin, take a quiet second to subscribe to Bedtime Past Stories if you enjoy calm bedtime history, relaxing historical documentaries, and stories made to help you fall asleep. Now, settle in, lower the lights, and let your breathing slow as we travel to the silent cliffs of Egypt's Valley of the Kings, where one of the most famous discoveries in history waited beneath the sand. Tonight, we are going to Egypt. Not the loud Egypt of crowded museums, bright camera flashes and hurried tour groups moving quickly from one golden object to the next, but an older, quieter Egypt. An Egypt of still desert air, pale limestone cliffs, long shadows, and warm dust resting on the ground before sunrise. An Egypt where the mountains hold their silence for centuries and where history does not shout. It waits. It waits beneath stone. It waits beneath sand. It waits behind sealed doorways, in corridors no one has entered for thousands of years, in chambers where the air itself seems to belong to another age. And in one of those hidden places, under the dry earth of the Valley of the Kings, the tomb of a young pharaoh lay almost forgotten. His name was Tutankhamun. Today, his name is famous across the world. It brings to mind golden masks, painted coffins, dark chambers, ancient rituals, and the strange feeling that something impossibly old has somehow survived almost untouched. But before the discovery of his tomb, Tutankhamun was not one of the most famous kings of Egypt. He was not remembered like Ramses the Great. He was not spoken of with the same power as Thutmose, Hatshepsut, or Akhenaten. He had ruled young. He had died young. His name had been partly buried by time, politics, and the long turning of history, and yet, that is part of what makes his story so perfect for the night. Because sometimes the past does not return through the thunder of famous battles or the commands of great rulers. Sometimes it returns quietly, through a step found under rubble, a sealed doorway in the dust, a small opening made by candlelight, and a patient man leaning forward to see what waited on the other side. So tonight, we begin not inside the tomb, but outside it. We begin in the valley. Imagine the Valley of the Kings in the cool hour before morning. The sky is still dark blue, though a thin grey line has begun to gather behind the eastern hills. The air is cool enough that a person might pull a coat closer around the shoulders. The desert, which will soon become bright and hot and sharp with sunlight, is still gentle. It lies in shadow. The stones are pale, but not yet white. The cliffs look almost purple. There is no movement at first, only the quiet shape of the land. The valley is not green. It is not soft in the way a forest is soft or wet in the way a riverbank is wet. It is dry, bare and carved by time. The hills rise in broken folds of limestone, their slopes marked by loose stones and ancient paths. The ground is covered with dust, chips of rock, and the memory of work. Nothing grows easily here. There are no wide fields, no orchards, no reeds whispering beside the Nile. The river is not far away, but here, inside the valley, it feels distant. The land seems separate from everyday life, set aside for something solemn. This was part of its purpose. The ancient Egyptians chose the west bank of the Nile for their royal dead because the west was the direction of the setting sun. Each evening the sun disappeared into the western horizon, entering the underworld before being reborn in the east the next morning. To us, sunset may simply be the end of the day. But to the Egyptians, it was part of a sacred rhythm. Descent, darkness, renewal, return. The dead king too would travel through darkness and hope for rebirth. And so the pharaohs of the new kingdom were buried in hidden tombs in this valley of stone, not in pyramids rising openly into the sky, but underground, inside the hills. The great pyramids of earlier dynasties had been visible monuments, vast shapes of stone declaring royal power for all to see. But visibility brought danger. Tombs could be robbed, entrances could be found, treasures could be taken. Over time, burial customs changed. The kings of the new kingdom were placed in tombs cut into the cliffs and hidden among the valleys of western Thebes. Their resting places were designed to be secret, protected not by height and mass alone, but by concealment. The Valley of the Kings became a landscape of hidden doors. From the outside, many of the tombs began simply: a cut in the rock, a descending passage, a doorway tucked into the slope. But inside they could unfold into long corridors, painted chambers, side rooms, storage spaces, burial halls, and sacred texts written across walls in colour. These were not merely graves, they were houses for eternity. They were carefully prepared passages into another world. By the early 20th century, when our story begins, this valley had already been searched for many years. Archaeologists, travellers, treasure hunters, scholars, workers, and officials had come and gone. Many tombs had been discovered. Some had been robbed in antiquity. Others had been cleared, studied, copied, emptied, and catalogued. The valley was famous, but it was also frustrating. It seemed as if most of its secrets had already been taken. Many experts believed there was little left to find. The old royal tombs were known. The ground had been disturbed. The valley floor had been crossed again and again. Paths had been made, huts built, spoil heaps moved, stones shifted, and earlier excavations left their marks everywhere. It was not an untouched wilderness. It was a worked landscape layered not only with ancient history, but with the history of modern searching. And yet in that layered ground, something remained. A small tomb, a young king, a doorway still sealed. Before we reach that moment, we need to meet the man who kept looking. Howard Carter was not born into wealth. He was not a lord, and he did not begin life as a grand academic figure surrounded by titles. He had started as an artist. His skill was careful observation. He could draw what he saw with precision. That mattered deeply in archaeology at the time, because photography existed but was not always enough, and many wall paintings, inscriptions, and objects needed to be copied by hand. Carter learned to look slowly. He learned to notice lines, colours, chips, breaks, patterns, and details others might miss. This is important. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was not only a story of luck, it was also a story of patience, memory, discipline, and the ability to keep looking at ground that others had dismissed. In Egypt, Carter worked for years. He gained experience in the heat, dust, bureaucracy, excitement and disappointment of archaeological work. He learned how excavations were organised, how local workers moved earth, how tombs were cleared, how objects were recorded, how fragile discoveries could be damaged by haste. He also learned how unpredictable the work could be. A season might bring great discoveries, or almost nothing. Weeks could pass with only dust, stones, and fragments. Hope had to be rationed carefully. Archaeology, especially in the desert, is a quiet kind of endurance. It is not usually the sudden dramatic moment we imagine. It is not always one brave person brushing sand away from a golden treasure. More often, it is long days of measuring, clearing, carrying, labelling, waiting, and recording. It is walking the same ground in different light. It is looking at stones one by one. It is keeping notes when the mind grows tired. It is choosing not to rush. Carter had something else too, a belief that the tomb of Tutankhamun had not yet been found. There were clues. The name of Tutankhamun had appeared on small objects, seals, and traces from the valley. There were hints that his burial had taken place somewhere nearby, but no royal tomb had been identified as his. Some scholars thought it might have been lost, destroyed, or already robbed so completely that nothing meaningful remained. Others believed there was no reason to expect much from such a minor king. But Carter remained interested. Tutankhamun's reign had come after one of the most unusual and unsettled periods in Egyptian history, the Amarna period, associated with Akhenaten, the pharaoh who had elevated the worship of the Aten, the sun disk, and disrupted traditional religious practices. Tutankhamun, who came to the throne as a child, lived during the aftermath of that religious and political upheaval. His reign seems to have included a restoration of older traditions. His original name may have been Tutankhaten, connected with the Aten, before becoming Tutankhamun, connected with Amun, one of Egypt's great gods. But for our purposes tonight, we do not need to rush through dynasties and political details. We simply need to understand that Tutankhamun belonged to a delicate moment in history. He was young, his reign was brief, his memory was complicated, and somehow, because of that complicated history, his tomb was not celebrated openly across the centuries. It disappeared. There is something restful, in a strange way, about thinking of a hidden thing remaining hidden for so long. While empires changed, languages changed, religions changed, kings rose and fell, and the modern world slowly arrived with trains, electricity, cameras, newspapers, and tourists, the tomb stayed in darkness. The air inside remained still. The objects remained where they had been placed. Chairs, boxes, chariots, jars, beds, statues, jewellery, linen, food offerings, ritual objects, and the nested protections around the king rested in the silence of the rock. Above them, the valley filled with sunlight each morning and shadow each evening. Wind moved dust across the ground. Occasional storms sent water through the valley, rearranging debris. Workmen of later times built huts above forgotten places. Other tombs were opened, robbed, explored and studied. But Tutankhamun's tomb remained concealed beneath rubble near the entrance to the tomb of Ramses VI. That detail matters because it may have helped protect it. The ground above it was covered and disturbed in ways that made the hidden entrance less obvious. Later activity, ironically, may have shielded it from discovery. Sometimes history survives not because it is perfectly protected, but because it is accidentally overlooked. By the time Carter began his final search in earnest, he was working with the support of Lord Carnarvon, an English aristocrat who funded excavations in Egypt. Carnarvon had money, interest and patience, though patience has limits. Excavations were expensive, seasons passed, results were uncertain. The Valley of the Kings had already disappointed many hopes. Carter's work required financial backing, and that backing could not continue forever. The relationship between Carter and Carnarvon was central to the story. Carter brought field knowledge, persistence, and belief. Carnarvon brought resources and the willingness for a time to continue the search. But by 1922, after years of work without the great discovery Carter hoped for, Carnarvon was close to stopping. It seemed reasonable. The valley had been searched. The costs were real. Perhaps there was nothing left. Carter asked for one more season, one more attempt, one more chance to clear a section of ground he believed had not been properly examined. There is a quiet human feeling in that request. Not grand, not dramatic, just the simple need for a final try. Anyone who has worked long towards something uncertain knows that feeling. The reluctance to stop before the last piece of ground has been checked, the last page read, the last question asked. And so, the work resumed. Imagine the camp in the early morning, a few tents or simple shelters, tables with papers, tools stacked neatly or leaning against stone, workers gathering before the day grows hot, the sound of quiet voices in Arabic and English, the scrape of sandals on dust, the dry cough of someone clearing the throat in the cool air, a kettle perhaps, or cups of tea, the sun not yet high. There is no golden tomb yet, no famous mask, no crowds, only the valley, the workers, the tools, and a plan. The work began near the area below the tomb of Ramses VI, where ancient workmen's huts stood. These small huts, built long after Tutankhamun's burial, had to be cleared. They were not glamorous, they were not treasures. They were simple remains of labourers' shelters, part of the long history of the valley itself. But beneath or near such ordinary traces, the entrance to something extraordinary could still lie hidden. This is one of the great lessons of archaeology. The ordinary often covers the extraordinary. A broken pot, a workman's hut, a patch of disturbed gravel, a line in the dust. These may not look important to the impatient eye. But as someone trained to read the ground, they can matter. The past rarely presents itself with a title card. It appears in layers, fragments, absences, and small changes in texture. The day would warm quickly. In the Valley of the Kings, the sun can turn the pale cliffs bright and harsh. Shadows shrink. Stone reflects heat. Dust clings to skin and clothing. Men working with baskets, picks, and hoes move rhythmically, carrying debris away, clearing, sorting, watching. The pace is physical but not hurried. Excavation must be controlled. Too much force can damage what has waited so long to be found. For a sleep story, it is worth slowing down here. Think of the repeated movements. Loosen the earth, lift the basket, carry it away, tip it out, return. Loosen the earth, lift the basket, carry it away, return. The sound is not loud, it is steady. The work has a rhythm. Stone against tool, sand sliding into woven baskets, low voices, footsteps, a pause for water, the sun rising higher. Across the valley the cliffs remain still. The ancient tomb entrances cut into the rock do not move. Their shadows shift slightly as the day passes, but otherwise they hold their silence. Above everything is the pale Egyptian sky, clear and immense. Carter watched the work carefully. He He had spent enough time in Egypt to know that discovery could come suddenly, but only after long preparation. Most days did not change history. Most days ended with notes, tired bodies, and no great news. Still, each day mattered because it removed another uncertainty. Each basket of rubble carried away made the ground more legible, and then, on November 4th, 1922, something appeared. A step, not a treasure, not a glitter of gold, not a statue, just a step cut into the rock, partly buried under debris. But to an excavator, a step can be as powerful as a trumpet. A step means intention. A step means an entrance. A step means someone, long ago, cut a path downward into the earth. The workers had found the first sign of a descending stairway. We're not going to rush beyond it yet. Let us stay with that first moment. A patch of cleared ground, dust, stone, a line where there had seemed to be none. The top of a step emerging from beneath the centuries. Carter understanding, perhaps before anyone else fully did, that this might be the beginning of the thing he had searched for. The valley did not change around him. The sun still moved. The cliffs still stood. But the meaning of the ground had shifted. What had been a work site became a threshold. More clearing revealed more steps. The staircase descended, cut into the bedrock, filled with rubble. With each step uncovered, the possibility grew stronger. The workers continued carefully, removing debris from the stairwell, exposing the shape of an entrance that had been hidden for a very long time. There must have been excitement, but also caution. Egyptology at this level required control. A discovered entrance could be fragile. Seals might remain. Evidence might be lost if handled badly. Carter also knew that Lord Carnarvon, his patron, should be present if this truly was a major find. So the work had to balance urgency and restraint. That balance, excitement held inside patience, gives this story its gentle power. Many discoveries are ruined by haste. This one would be defined by waiting. When enough of the stairway had been cleared, a sealed doorway appeared. The doorway was plastered and stamped with ancient seals. Some signs suggested that the tomb had been entered and resealed in antiquity, perhaps by officials after an early robbery. This was not unusual. Many royal tombs had suffered theft not long after burial, but the presence of seals still mattered deeply. A sealed door meant that something beyond might remain. Carter sent word to Carnarvon. The message was short and restrained, but it carried enormous meaning. He had made a discovery in the Valley of the Kings. Carnarvon should come, and then came the waiting. This part is important for the sleep rhythm of the story. The entrance had been found, but the tomb was not yet opened. The desert had revealed the beginning of a secret, then asked the modern world to wait a little longer. Carter had to protect the site. The stairway was covered again for safety. Guards were arranged. The valley returned outwardly to quiet. Imagine how strange those days must have felt. Beneath the covered steps was a sealed doorway. Behind the doorway, perhaps a tomb, perhaps a disappointment, perhaps another robbed chamber, perhaps something greater than Carter dared hope. Above it, the ordinary rhythm of the valley continued. Workmen came and went. The sun rose and set. The moon passed over the cliffs, and Carter had to live with the knowledge that something waited below the sand. Waiting is part of the story of Tutankhamun. The ancient Egyptians waited for rebirth after death. The tomb waited in darkness for more than 3,000 years. Carter waited for Carnarvon to arrive, and tonight we let the story wait too. Because a bedtime history should not hurry toward the brightest object. It should move like candlelight across a wall, slowly revealing one shape, then another. While Carnarvon travelled to Egypt, let us step back and imagine the young king whose name was attached to this mystery. Tutankhamun came to the throne when he was still a child, likely around the age of 8 or 9. A boy king in a world of priests, generals, courtiers, rituals, and inherited expectations. Egypt at the time was not simply a kingdom of monuments and gold. It was a living society with farmers along the Nile, scribes in offices, priests in temple courts, artisans in workshops, boatmen, soldiers, cooks, weavers, children, families, animals, markets, grain, taxes, festivals, and endless labour organised around the river's yearly rhythm. The Nile rose and fell. Fields were watered, mud was left behind, seeds were planted, grain grew, boats moved along the river, temples received offerings, scribes counted goods, Artisans carved, painted, hammered, polished, and carried. Life was practical and sacred at once. For a pharaoh, even a young one, every gesture had meaning. He was not just a ruler in the modern political sense. He was part of the cosmic order, linked to the gods, expected to maintain balance, truth, harmony, rightness. The king's body, names, rituals, images, and burial all mattered because they were connected to the order of the world. But Tutankhamun was also human. Behind the gold and ceremony was a young person who grew up in a palace world we can only partly reconstruct. He would have been surrounded by attendants, teachers, officials, and ritual specialists. He may have learned to read signs, perform ceremonies, shoot arrows, ride in chariots, receive visitors, and appear before the people. His life was shaped by expectations older than he was, and by political forces far beyond his childhood understanding. His tomb, when it was finally found, would preserve both the royal and the human. That is why it moved people so deeply. It was not only treasure, it was a room full of things once chosen for a journey. Furniture, clothing, food containers, games, weapons, ritual objects, beds shaped with animal forms, chariots that could no longer move through the world of the living, boxes packed with care, statues standing guard, objects for power, comfort, protection, and identity. A tomb can seem like an ending, but to the ancient Egyptians it was also preparation for continuation. The dead king needed what he might require in the next world. His name needed to endure. His body needed protection. His image needed ritual attention. The tomb was a sleeping place, a house, a sacred machine, a hidden chamber of transformation. For more than 3,000 years, Tutankhamun's hidden house remained mostly intact. Outside, history moved on. The new kingdom ended, other dynasties ruled, Egypt changed, foreign powers came, languages shifted. Greek, Roman, Christian, Islamic, Ottoman, and modern histories layered themselves across the land. The ancient temples weathered, sand gathered, statues broke, names were forgotten and rediscovered. Travellers came with notebooks, scholars tried to read the old signs. The hieroglyphs, silent for centuries to most of the world, were eventually understood again, and still, under the valley floor the young king waited. This is what gives the discovery its dreamlike quality. It is not only that something valuable was found, it is that a sealed pocket of time opened. A human life from the 14th century BCE, surrounded by objects placed by careful hands, reappeared in the 20th century almost as if the intervening centuries had folded quietly around it. When Lord Carnarvon arrived in Egypt with his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, the work could continue. The sealed entrance that had been found earlier was ready to be examined further. Carter and his team reopened the stairway. The steps were cleared again. The doorway stood before them. There is a temptation to imagine this moment with dramatic music and flashing excitement. But in reality, the more powerful version is quieter. A small group of people, a sealed door, dust, stone, careful hands, a decision to proceed. The first doorway bore evidence that it had been breached and resealed. This suggested ancient disturbance, but not necessarily total destruction. Many tomb robbers in antiquity entered quickly, took portable valuables, and left. Officials sometimes discovered the robbery, restored order as best they could, and resealed the tomb. If that had happened here, perhaps much remained. Behind the first doorway was not yet the treasure chamber. There was a passage filled with rubble. The team had to clear it carefully. The corridor sloped downward, packed with debris from floor to ceiling. It was as if the tomb had been deliberately blocked, sealed not only by a door, but by a solid mass of stone chips and earth. Again, the work became rhythmic. Remove debris, carry it out, record what appears, watch for seals, marks, objects, fragments, traces. The corridor did not give up its secret all at once. It extended inward, slowly revealing its length as the blockage was cleared. The air would have been dusty, the light limited. The men worked with patience, aware that at any moment something fragile could appear. Here, for the listener, we can imagine the narrowness of the passage. The stone walls close on either side, the ceiling low, the sound of movement softened by dust. Outside, the valley remains bright. Inside, the light is controlled and warm. The modern world narrows down to a corridor cut thousands of years before. The further they cleared, the closer they came to a second sealed doorway. This second door was the true threshold of wonder. But we're still in the first block of our journey, and the purpose of this opening part is to let the world gather around us. The desert, the valley, the search, the young king, the patience of the excavation, and the slow movement toward the hidden chamber. So let us rest for a moment in the scene before the full revelation. The day is fading in the Valley of the Kings. The cliffs, harsh at noon, soften into warm gold and then muted violet. Shadows lengthen across the floor of the valley. The tools are set aside. Workers speak quietly as the heat leaves the stones. A candle or lamp glows inside a tent. Papers lie on a table. Sketches, notes, lists. Perhaps a plan of the stairway and passage. Dust settles on everything. Carter knows now that this is no ordinary find. Carnarvon knows it too. But the most famous moment has not yet happened. The second sealed doorway still stands. Behind it, in the dark, objects wait in silence. Gilded wood, painted chests, dismantled chariots, funerary beds, statues, jars, linen. The strange, crowded stillness of a royal tomb. And somewhere deeper inside, protected by nested shrines, stone, wood, gold, and ritual, the young king remains at the center of it all. But no one has seen those things yet. Not tonight. Not in this first slow movement of the story. For now, we remain outside the final door, in the quiet space between discovery and revelation. That space has its own beauty. It is the pause before a page is turned, the breath before a candle is lifted, the moment when history has begun to open, but has not yet fully spoken. The valley grows darker, the sky above Egypt deepens from blue to black. Stars appear, one by one, over the dry ridges. The crescent moon, pale and quiet, hangs above the western hills. Somewhere far away, the Nile continues its ancient course through fields and villages. But here, in the valley, the night is still. The sealed door waits below, the sand cools, the cliffs keep watch. And the story of King Tutankhamun's tomb is ready, slowly and gently, to move closer to the candlelit moment when the darkness inside will finally be seen. The second part of the story begins at the sealed doorway. Not yet inside the tomb, not yet before the golden beds, the silent statues, or the crowded chamber that would soon become famous across the world. But in the narrow space before revelation, a stairway had appeared beneath the sand, a passage had begun to descend into the earth, and at the end of that passage a blocked doorway waited in the quiet. For Howard Carter, the discovery of the first step had already changed everything. What had looked like another patch of valley floor had become a threshold. What had been dust and rubble had become direction. The ground was no longer simply ground. It was a sentence from the past, only partly uncovered, and every new stone removed was another word becoming visible. The work continued carefully. No one could know yet what waited behind the sealed entrance. It might be a royal tomb. It might be a small, unfinished chamber. It might be another ancient robbery, cleared long ago with only broken jars and scattered fragments left behind. It might be nothing. But the possibility was enough. The Valley of the Kings had known many disappointments. It had given up tombs that were damaged, tombs that were empty, tombs that had been stripped by thieves in antiquity, tombs whose walls remained but whose treasures were gone. Archaeology teaches patience because it rarely gives certainty at the beginning. It offers hints, a cut in stone, a line of plaster, a seal, a fragment of a name, a stairway descending into darkness. And so, Carter did not rush. The stairway had to be cleared step by step. Imagine the scene in the pale morning light. The sun has not yet become harsh, and the air still carries a slight coolness from the night. The workers gather near the opening, their movements familiar and quiet. Baskets are set down, tools are lifted, loose stones are moved aside. The first steps are visible and more are expected below. Each one must be uncovered without damaging the sides, the plaster, the possible markings, or any object hidden among the rubble. The work is slow. A pick loosens debris, a small shovel lifts it, a basket receives it. The basket is carried away. The worker returns. Again, the pick. Again, the shovel. Again, the basket. Again, the quiet return. There is something almost hypnotic in that rhythm. It belongs to many kinds of human work across history: digging, carrying, building, harvesting, grinding grain, weaving cloth, shaping clay, copying words. History is often remembered through kings and discoveries, but most of the past was made of repeated movements, hands doing the same necessary thing again and again beneath the sun, beside other hands doing the same. Here, in the Valley of the Kings, those repeated movements were clearing a path into one of the most famous hidden rooms in the world. As the debris came away, the staircase revealed itself more fully. The steps descended into the bedrock, partly filled by rubble that had protected them for centuries. The sides were rough, functional, cut for access rather than beauty. There was no golden shine here, no painted wall, no polished shrine, only stone and dust. The simplicity of the entrance made the hidden possibility more powerful. Many ancient tombs began this way: a practical descent, a blocked doorway, a passage into the unseen. The first sealed door stood at the bottom of the stairs. Carter saw impressions in the plaster, marks left by ancient seals. Some of them bore the jackal and 9 captives, a symbol associated with the royal necropolis. There were also signs that the doorway had been opened and sealed again in antiquity. This mattered. It suggested that the tomb had not been completely untouched, but it also suggested that officials had once restored order and closed it again. A disturbed tomb was not necessarily an empty tomb. In the ancient world, tomb robbery could happen soon after burial. Workers, guards, officials, thieves, or people connected to the necropolis might know where valuables were hidden. Gold, oils, jewellery, fine linen, and portable luxury objects could be tempting. But tomb robbers often moved quickly. They could break in, seize what they could carry, and leave many large or less accessible things behind. Sometimes the authorities discovered the robbery, repaired the entrance, and resealed the tomb. So a resealed doorway could mean loss, but it could also mean survival. Carter understood this delicate uncertainty. Every mark on the plaster mattered, every seal impression mattered, every break and repair mattered. This was not simply an entrance, it was evidence. At this point, the proper thing was to wait for Lord Carnarvon. Carter had found something significant enough that his patron should be present. Carnarvon had funded the search for years. He had supported Carter through seasons of frustration. If this was truly the tomb they had hoped to find, the moment of entry belonged to both of them. So Carter sent the famous message. He had made a wonderful discovery in the valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered until Carnarvon arrived. Congratulations. The words were brief, but behind them lay years of work. Then came the waiting. For a bedtime history, this waiting is worth lingering over, because waiting has a sound of its own. The stairway, once uncovered, was covered again for protection. Guards watched the site. The valley went on beneath the same sky. Visitors may have passed nearby without knowing what slept below the earth. The hills caught the morning light. Shadows shortened and lengthened. The workers returned to other tasks. Carter kept his knowledge inside him, perhaps with difficulty. There is a peculiar kind of silence around a secret that is almost known. Not a secret hidden forever, a secret with a date approaching. Carnarvon had to travel to Egypt. Travel took time. Letters, messages, ships, trains, schedules. All the ordinary machinery of the modern world had to move before the ancient doorway could be opened. The tomb had waited for more than 3,000 years, and now it waited a few more days. Those few days must have felt long. Imagine Carter in the evening, perhaps in his house near Luxor, looking over notes, thinking through possibilities. He knew the valley. He knew the importance of seals. He knew the dangers of disappointment. He had seen enough excavations to distrust easy certainty. The tomb might be robbed. It might contain little. It might not even belong to Tutankhamun. But the evidence was strong enough to trouble his sleep. Outside, the night over Luxor would have been different from the silence of the valley. Near the Nile, life continued. Boats moved on dark water, animals shifted in courtyards, lamps glowed in houses, voices carried softly through the evening. The river, unlike the valley, was alive with human rhythm. But across the river, in the western hills, the staircase remained covered. The sealed doorway waited in darkness. When Lord Carnarvon arrived with his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, the work resumed. The stairway was opened again. The steps were cleared once more. The first sealed doorway stood at the bottom, waiting for examination and entry. The team photographed and recorded what they could. Then, the door was opened. Behind it was not the burial chamber, not yet. Instead, a descending corridor appeared, packed from floor to ceiling with rubble. The passage had been deliberately filled. It was another layer of protection, another pause in the architecture of concealment. The tomb did not reveal itself all at once. It required effort, patience, and movement through blockage. This filled corridor became the next task. The workers began clearing it, slowly, carefully, basket by basket. The passage descended into the rock. Its walls were close, and its fill was heavy. Stone chips, rubble, and dust had to be removed without damaging any evidence. Each load carried out brought them deeper. With every foot cleared, the modern world moved further into the hidden space of the ancient one. Think of the change in light. At the entrance, the daylight is bright. Outside, the desert sun strikes the stones. But inside the corridor, light becomes narrower. It comes from lamps, reflected from pale walls caught in dust. The air is different. It is still, enclosed, softened by rock. Voices lower naturally in such a place. Even people who are excited tend to whisper, as if the stone itself asks for quiet. The corridor may have smelled of dust, old stone, and dry earth. Not dampness, because this is Egypt's desert West Bank, but a dry, ancient stillness. The smell of a place closed from ordinary air. The smell of time held in mineral silence. As the fill was removed, small traces appeared. Fragments, seal impressions, signs of ancient disturbance. The passage had likely been entered by robbers, then resealed and refilled. Carter and his team saw evidence that the tomb was not completely untouched, but again, that did not mean it was empty. The suspense here was not loud, it was practical. Would there be anything left? Would the burial be intact? Would the name of Tutankhamun appear? Would the years of belief be rewarded? The corridor continued. The workers cleared and carried. The sound of baskets and tools echoed slightly in the confined space. Outside, the rubble was taken away. Inside, the passage slowly breathed again for the first time in centuries. At the far end, another sealed doorway emerged. This was the second door, the true door, the one that stood between Carter and the chamber that would change the history of archaeology. It was plastered. It bore seals. It also showed signs of ancient opening and repair. But it stood. It still separated the passage from whatever lay beyond. Carter examined it with intense care. Somewhere on or near the doorway, the evidence pointed toward Tutankhamun. The signs were not merely hopeful now, they were becoming specific. The young king's name was near. We can pause here and imagine the physical position of everyone involved. The corridor is narrow, the second sealed door is before them. Behind it is darkness. They do not yet know what kind of space lies beyond. A small room, a robbed chamber, a collapsed passage, a treasure room, the burial itself. The air on the other side has not been shared with the living for a long time. The door is more than plaster and stone. It is a membrane between two worlds of time. Carter decided to make a small opening. Not to break everything open, not to rush in. Just a small hole, carefully made in the upper left corner of the doorway. The act itself was delicate. A hole large enough to inspect, small enough to preserve control. Through it, air could pass, light could enter. A human eye could look into the chamber. This is the moment the world remembers. But before we arrive fully inside it, let us slow the scene down. A candle is prepared. The small opening is made. The old air escapes. Carter later described how the hot air leaving the chamber caused the candle flame to flicker. That image has become part of the discovery's legend. The candle trembling as ancient air meets modern flame. Whether remembered exactly or shaped by the poetry of the moment, it is a perfect image for this story. A flame at a hole in a sealed door. Darkness beyond. People waiting. Carnarvon asks if Carter can see anything. Carter's eyes adjust. At first, perhaps only darkness, then shapes, lines, reflections, animal forms, gold, objects, everywhere. And Carter answers with the words that became famous. Yes, wonderful things. For a sleep story, we do not need to make the moment explosive. We can let it glow quietly. Wonderful things, not shouted, not screamed, simply spoken in astonishment. The chamber beyond the door was not orderly in the way a museum gallery is orderly. It was crowded, strange, and dreamlike. Objects were piled, stacked, leaning, resting, gleaming in lamplight. The first room, later called the antechamber, held items placed there for the king's afterlife, but also disturbed by ancient intruders. There were gilded couches shaped like animals. There were chariots, partly dismantled. There were boxes, jars, stools, beds, baskets, and statues. There were shapes that must have seemed almost unreal after the darkness. The light from Carter's candle or lamp would not have revealed everything at once. It would have moved across surfaces, a glint here, a curve there, the head of an animal couch, a golden side panel, the dark form of a guardian statue, the pale line of a box, the shadow of wheels, the narrow spaces between objects. The first view was partial. That may be what made it so powerful. The room did not present itself as a catalogue. It appeared as a vision, a sealed space filled with the material world of an ancient king. For more than 3,000 years, these objects had waited in silence. They had not been arranged for modern eyes. They had been placed according to ritual, practicality, haste, belief, and burial tradition. Some items had been disturbed by robbers and then roughly restored. Others remained where ancient hands had set them. The result was not neat, but alive with presence. Carter, Carnarvon, and Lady Evelyn looked into the chamber through the small opening. They were standing at the edge of one of the greatest archaeological discoveries ever made, but they were still outside. The tomb had shown them enough to transform uncertainty into awe, but not enough to satisfy it. The small opening was the first glimpse. The full entry would come next. But even before stepping inside, the meaning of the discovery was clear. This was no empty tomb. This was no minor fragment. This was a chamber dense with objects, many of them beautiful, many of them precious, many of them historically invaluable, and it belonged to Tutankhamun. The boy king, once obscure, had returned. The world beyond the door had been waiting in the dark. Now it had been seen. After the first glimpse, the team had to proceed with extraordinary care. The temptation to enter quickly must have been enormous, but the responsibility was greater. A tomb like this was not simply a treasure house. It was an archaeological context. Every object's position mattered. Every layer of disturbance mattered. Every fragment might help explain what had happened after the burial, what robbers had touched, what officials had restored, and how the original burial had been arranged. To enter carelessly would be to lose information forever. So the discovery became not only a moment of wonder, but the beginning of years of work. That is one of the calm truths behind the dramatic legend. The famous glimpse was only the opening note. The real task was slow, methodical, demanding, and delicate. It required documentation, photography, conservation, numbering, packing, moving, studying and interpreting thousands of objects. A tomb can be found in a moment, but it can take a lifetime to understand. In those first hours and days, however, the immediate concern was access, security, and recording. News would spread. Officials had to be involved. The Egyptian Antiquities Service had authority. The tomb had to be protected. Objects could not simply be removed. The chamber had to be treated as both sacred historical evidence and a fragile physical environment. Let us imagine the antechamber after the doorway was opened enough for entry. The space was not large. It was crowded from wall to wall. The floor was filled with objects. The air carried dust. The walls were plain compared with the painted burial chamber deeper inside. The objects themselves created the visual richness: gold leaf, black resin, pale wood, ivory, alabaster, linen, leather, metal, and painted surfaces. There were 3 large animal-shaped couches. One had the form of a lion or feline creature. Another resembled a cow or celestial animal. Another had a strange composite form. Their long bodies and gilded surfaces must have looked almost like beings resting in the darkness. Funerary furniture in ancient Egypt often had symbolic meaning, connected with protection, rebirth, and divine forces. To modern eyes, they were beautiful and strange. To the ancient Egyptians, they were part of a sacred language. There were chariots, dismantled or stacked, their wheels and frames preserved. Chariots were associated with royal power, hunting, ceremony, and movement. In the afterlife, as in life, the king would need symbols and tools of status. The presence of chariots in the tomb helped connect the young king to the royal image expected of a pharaoh. There were boxes and chests, some painted, some sealed, some disturbed. A box can seem ordinary until you remember that it has been closed for more than 3,000 years. Inside might be linen, jewellery, sandals, ritual items, food, weapons, or personal possessions. Each container is a smaller silence within the larger silence of the tomb. There were stools and chairs, including pieces that show the elegance of ancient Egyptian craftsmanship. Wood was precious in Egypt, where large trees were not abundant in the desert landscape. Fine furniture often required imported materials, careful joinery, inlay, and skilled finishing. A chair in the tomb is never just a chair. It is evidence of trade, artistry, status, posture, comfort, and daily life at the royal court. There were jars, some for oils, some for food, some for ritual substances. The ancient Egyptians prepared the tomb not as a symbolic emptiness, but as a supplied environment. The dead king's journey required material support. Even if many offerings had symbolic meaning, they still tell us about what Egyptians valued, feared, hoped, and imagined. There were guardian statues near another sealed doorway within the tomb. Dark, upright figures, gilded in parts, stood like silent sentinels. They guarded the entrance to the burial chamber. Their presence must have been deeply affecting. In a room crowded with objects, these figures suggested order, protection, and solemnity. They were not there for decoration in the modern sense. They were part of the tomb's spiritual architecture. Carter and his team had to move through this room without disturbing it unnecessarily. Pathways had to be made. Objects had to be photographed in place. The photographer Harry Burton would play a crucial role, producing images that remain among the most important archaeological photographs ever taken. His work allowed the tomb to be documented visually before objects were removed. Think of Burton's camera in that dim space, tripod set carefully, lights arranged, long exposures, objects still in their ancient positions. The camera, a modern machine quietly facing a room prepared for eternity. There is something beautiful in that meeting. The patient technology of the 20th century recording the patient craftsmanship of the 14th century BCE. The work would require electric lights eventually, but the story's first emotional image remains candlelight. Candlelight belongs to the mood of discovery because it reveals slowly. It does not flatten everything. It lets objects emerge from darkness. It keeps mystery at the edges. It gives gold a soft warmth rather than a harsh glare. For our purposes tonight, we can imagine the antechamber not as a brightly lit museum room, but as it might have felt at first. Crowded, dim, golden in fragments, silent, almost breathing with age. Yet even in wonder, practical concerns remained. The tomb had been disturbed in antiquity. Robbers had entered at least part of it. They had likely taken some small valuables. They had rummaged, opened containers, perhaps dragged items from one room to another. Ancient officials had later resealed parts of the tomb, leaving signs of hurried restoration. This meant that the antechamber was not a perfectly untouched arrangement from the burial day. It was a preserved scene with a history of disturbance. That complexity makes it more interesting. The tomb was not frozen in one moment. It held several moments layered together: the original burial, the robbery, the official restoration, the long silence, the modern discovery. Each layer left traces. This is why careful archaeology matters. A treasure hunter sees gold. An archaeologist sees relationships. Which box stood where? Which seal was broken? Which object had been moved? Which door was repaired? Which chamber remained sealed? Which materials decayed? Which insects entered? Which footprints, if any, survived? Which fragments belonged together? Which names were written on which objects? The tomb was not only beautiful, it was readable, slowly, with attention. In the days after the opening, the discovery began to draw attention beyond the valley. News travelled. Newspapers became interested. The world wanted details. Egyptology, already fascinating to the public, suddenly had a story with everything: a young king, a hidden tomb, gold, mystery, and the romance of ancient Egypt emerging from darkness. But on the ground, the work remained delicate. The antechamber was only the beginning. Other spaces lay beyond: the burial chamber, the treasury, the annex. The tomb's plan was smaller than many royal tombs. which makes sense for a king who died young and perhaps unexpectedly. It may not have been originally intended for a pharaoh, or it may have been adapted quickly. Its smallness helped preserve the extraordinary density of objects. Instead of vast corridors and grand painted halls, Tutankhamun's tomb felt compact, crowded, almost intimate. This intimacy is part of its power. The tomb of a great king like Ramses might impress through scale. Tutankhamun's tomb impresses through nearness. Objects press close. Furniture stands almost within reach. The rooms feel like storage spaces for eternity, full of things chosen quickly, carefully, ritually, and perhaps under pressure. The young king's death must have required rapid preparation. Ancient Egyptian royal burial demanded immense organization, mummification, coffins, shrines, funerary equipment, ritual texts, offerings, ceremonies, and the physical preparation of the tomb. For a king who died unexpectedly, some items may have been adapted from others, repurposed, or completed in haste. Scholars have long studied these questions, and not all answers are simple. But again, we do not need to solve every scholarly debate tonight. We can let the tomb teach through atmosphere. A young king, a small tomb, a crowded chamber, a sealed darkness opened by candlelight, and thousands of objects whispering of a world that believed death was not an end, but a passage requiring preparation. As the second part of our story continues, let us move gently through the work of those first days. Carter did not empty the tomb quickly. He could not. Many objects were fragile. Some had dried, cracked, warped, or weakened. Materials like wood, leather, textiles, and reed could survive in Egypt's dry climate. But survival did not mean strength. An object could look whole and collapse if handled carelessly. Gold might endure, but the wood beneath gold leaf might be delicate. Linen might be brittle. Leather might be dry. Painted surfaces might flake. Ancient cords might break. The tomb required conservation before removal. This added another layer of slowness. An item had to be examined, photographed, numbered, described, sometimes stabilized, sometimes wrapped or supported, then moved. Each object became an event. A box was not just carried away. It was documented, opened, studied, and protected. A chair was not simply lifted. Its joints, decoration, and condition had to be considered. A chariot was not merely admired. It had to be understood as a complex structure of wood, leather, metal fittings, and symbolic value. This is the opposite of the treasure hunt fantasy. The real discovery was patient and almost domestic in its care. Hands wrapping, notes being written, labels attached, dust brushed gently, photographs made, measurements taken, objects resting in temporary workspaces. A tomb slowly becoming knowledge. The team used an empty nearby tomb as a workspace and laboratory. There, objects could be treated and prepared. The valley itself became not just a site of discovery, but a place of ongoing preservation. The ancient dead had prepared for eternity, and the modern excavators had to prepare the objects for survival in a new kind of eternity. The museum, the archive, the photograph, the scholarly record. There is a quiet tenderness in that. The objects had been sealed for the dead. Now they had to be cared for by the living. Not all of this was perfect by modern standards. Archaeology in the 1920s was not the same as archaeology today. Methods, ethics, laws, and expectations have changed. The discovery took place in a colonial context, with British and Egyptian authorities, foreign funding, press battles, and debates over ownership and control. Modern readers should remember that the tomb was found in Egypt, belonged to Egypt's heritage, and became part of a larger story about archaeology, nationalism, and cultural patrimony. But within the work itself, Carter's documentation was unusually careful for his time. The tomb was not simply looted in the old treasure hunting manner. It was recorded in great detail. That record remains invaluable. As evening came each day, the valley would return to quiet. The work stopped. The tools rested. The entrance was secured. The objects remained inside, some still waiting to be recorded, others prepared for removal. The cliffs held the cooling air. The sky deepened. Perhaps a few lights glowed near the site. Perhaps voices faded as workers left. Beyond the valley, the modern world buzzed with news, curiosity, and speculation. But inside the tomb, the silence continued. It is strange to think that even after discovery, Much of the tomb remained dark for long periods. Opening a tomb does not instantly make it part of ordinary life. The rooms still belonged to shadow. Light entered in controlled ways. People came and went carefully. Many objects spent their first modern days still in the positions where ancient hands had left them. The second sealed doorway, the one Carter looked through, had opened into the antechamber. But deeper inside, another sealed doorway waited between the guardian statues. Behind that doorway lay the burial chamber, and beyond that, the king himself. For now, in this second part, we remain mostly in the threshold world. The stairs, the corridor, the first opening, the antechamber, and the beginning of careful work. The heart of the tomb is near, but not yet fully reached. This pacing matters. A discovery like this is not one moment. It is a sequence of thresholds. The first step, the first door, the filled corridor. The second door, the candle hole, the first glimpse, the antechamber, the guardian statues, the burial chamber, the shrine, the sarcophagus, the coffins, the mask, the mummy. Each threshold changes what is known, but each also preserves mystery beyond it. That is why the story can unfold slowly, like a night journey through rooms lit one at a time. Let us return once more to the antechamber. Imagine standing just inside it, careful not to touch anything. The floor is uneven with objects. A gilded couch rises to one side. Chariot wheels lean in a controlled disorder. Boxes crowd the walls. A stool sits low, simple but elegant. A chest bears painted scenes. A dark statue watches from near the sealed inner door. Dust lies over surfaces that were once touched by embalmers, priests, artisans and officials. The air is still. The light is warm. The gold does not glitter sharply. It glows. There is a difference. Glitter feels restless. Glow feels quiet. In this tomb the gold glowed in the dimness, and that glow helped make the past feel present. Gold was not only wealth in ancient Egypt. It had sacred associations. It did not tarnish like ordinary metals. It could symbolize divine flesh, the imperishable body of the gods, the eternal brilliance of the sun. To place gold around a king was not merely to display riches. It was to connect him with permanence, radiance, and divinity. But some of the most moving objects were not the most precious. Sandals, linen garments, a headrest, a game board, food containers, chairs, and boxes. These things remind us that the afterlife was imagined with continuity. The king would need royal protection and divine transformation, yes, but also recognizable objects. The world beyond death was not imagined as pure abstraction. It had roads, fields, boats, food, clothing, and familiar forms. The tomb gathered those forms into a hidden space. This is where Tutankhamun becomes more than a golden mask. He becomes a person surrounded by the things his world believed he needed. A young ruler carried into eternity by the hands of many others. Think of those hands: the carpenter smoothing wood, the painter laying colour onto a chest, the goldsmith pressing thin gold over a surface, the weaver preparing linen, the scribe writing names, the priest reciting words, the labourer carrying objects into the tomb, the official checking seals, the last person stepping backward out of the chamber, the doorway being closed, the plaster pressed into place, the seal applied, the lamps extinguished, then darkness, long darkness, season after season, century after century, until a step appeared under the sand. This connection between the ancient workers and the modern workers is one of the quietest, deepest parts of the story. In both ages, people moved carefully in the tomb. In both ages, objects were handled with purpose. In both ages, the rooms were lit by small controlled flames or lamps. In both ages, the valley outside was silent and bright by day, dark and cool by night. The meanings were different, but the gestures sometimes rhyme: carrying, wrapping, sealing, opening, recording, protecting. As the first chamber was documented, Carter and his team looked ahead to the sealed doorway guarded by statues. They knew the burial chamber might lie behind it. They also knew that entering it would be another major step requiring permission, preparation, and care. The guardian statues stood on either side of the sealed doorway like figures from a dream. Dark-skinned with gilded details, wearing royal or divine elements, they faced outward into the antechamber. They were life-sized, or near life-sized, imposing not through movement, but through stillness. Their role was protective. They mark the boundary between outer storage and inner burial. To pass them was to move deeper into sacred space. So the second part of our story ends not with the final unveiling, but with the sense of approaching it. The stairway has been found, the corridor cleared. The candle has looked through the door. The antechamber has revealed its wonderful things. The world has begun to hear. And yet the young king remains deeper inside, still enclosed within the structure built to protect his eternity. Outside, the Valley of the Kings quiets again. The late afternoon light slides down the cliffs. The workers finish for the day. The antechamber is secured. The guardian statues remain in shadow. The candle flame is put out. Dust settles softly back onto ledges, boxes, and stone. The sky above the valley turns from gold to violet, and then from violet to deep blue. In the distance, the Nile moves through the dark land as it has moved for thousands of years, and under the western cliffs, behind doors that have only just begun to open, the tomb of King Tutankhamun waits for the next slow step inward. The third part of the story begins with the guardians. Not the first stairway, not the first sealed door, not the candlelit glimpse into the crowded antechamber, but the deeper silence beyond the first wonder. The antechamber had already changed everything. It had shown that the tomb was not empty. It had shown that the name of Tutankhamun was not only a fragment in records or a trace on small objects, but the name of a king whose burial equipment still waited in the valley. It had shown beds, chariots, boxes, jars, stools, and objects that seemed to have come out of a dream. But the antechamber was not the centre. It was a threshold. It was the room of first astonishment, where the modern eye first met the ancient arrangement. It was crowded and golden and strange, but deeper within the tomb, another doorway remained. And on either side of that sealed doorway stood two dark guardian statues, upright, calm, and watchful. They are among the most memorable figures from the tomb, tall, still, facing outward, their bodies dark, their details touched with gold, their presence solemn and protective. They seemed almost like attendants in a royal chamber, waiting in perfect silence for a king who would never again rise in the world of the living. Their faces did not show fear or haste. They did not move. They simply guarded the next boundary. Behind them was the burial chamber. For Carter and his team, this was a different kind of moment from the first glimpse. The antechamber had been a surprise, a first view through a small opening, a scene of wonderful things revealed in partial light. But the sealed doorway between the guardians carried a heavier meaning. It suggested that the king himself might lie beyond. Not merely furniture for the afterlife, not merely storage, the burial. To open that doorway was to pass into the heart of the tomb. And so, again, the story slows. A good discovery is not only a discovery of objects, it is a discovery of order. Each space has a meaning. Each doorway changes the emotional temperature. The tomb was small compared with the grandest royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, but it was arranged in layers. The outside world, the stairway, the corridor, the antechamber, the sealed doorway, the burial chamber. And then, nested inside that chamber, more layers, shrines, sarcophagus, coffins, wrappings, amulets, body. The ancient Egyptians understood protection through enclosure, one thing inside another, a name inside a cartouche, a body inside linen, a coffin inside a coffin, a sarcophagus inside a shrine, a king inside the mountain, and around all of it, words, images, seals, gods, ritual, and silence. Before the burial chamber could be fully entered and studied, the antechamber had to be documented. This work was slow. It took time to photograph, number, and stabilize the objects. The tomb had not been prepared for the convenience of 20th century archaeologists. The chamber was crowded almost from wall to wall. Some objects leaned against others, some were fragile, some blocked access. A careless step could damage something that had survived for more than 3,000 years. The team had to create order without destroying the order they had found. That is a difficult thing. They had to move through the room while preserving the evidence of how the room had been left. They had to make room to work without pretending the room had always been arranged for easy movement. They had to respect both the ancient placement and the modern need to understand it. So the antechamber became a place of careful attention. Photographs were taken, numbers were assigned, notes were written, objects were studied before they were moved. In the calm of this work, the tomb began to change from vision into record. Imagine an object resting in the antechamber, perhaps a small chest. It sits partly in shadow, its painted surface dusty, its edges worn by age. In the first moment of discovery, it is part of a crowded scene. It contributes to the feeling of wonder. But then the archaeologist's work begins. The chest must be seen as itself. Its position must be recorded. Its decoration must be described. Its condition must be noted. Was it open? Was it sealed? Was it disturbed by robbers? Was it placed deliberately against a wall? Did it contain clothing, jewellery, or ritual objects? Was it made for Tutankhamun, or adapted from someone else's burial equipment? Every object asks questions, and every question slows the work. This is why the discovery of the tomb took years to process. The public wanted the Golden Heart immediately. Newspapers wanted dramatic reports. Visitors and officials wanted access. The world's curiosity rushed forward, but the tomb could only be understood at the pace of careful hands, the pace of conservation, the pace of photography, the pace of dust gently lifted from an edge, the pace of a note written in a field journal. There is something deeply restful about that pace, even though the situation was filled with pressure. It is the pace of respect, not the rush to possess the past, but the attempt to listen to it. Behind the guardian statues, the sealed doorway remained. The statues themselves deserve quiet attention. In ancient Egyptian thought, statues could do more than represent. They could house presence. They could function ritually. They could protect, embody, and participate in sacred space. A statue in a tomb was not merely art. It had a role in the continuing existence of the dead. It stood where it stood for a reason. The two guardian figures in Tutankhamun's tomb were placed as watchers at the entrance to the burial chamber. Their dark surfaces and golden details created a striking contrast in the dim light. Each held a staff and mace, symbols of authority and protection. Their posture was formal. Their stillness was absolute. Think of the last ancient people to see them before the tomb was closed. The burial rites had been performed, the objects had been arranged, the inner spaces had been prepared, the guardians stood in place. Then the doorway was sealed. Plaster covered the entrance. Seals were pressed. The living withdrew. The tomb entered darkness. For centuries, those figures stood unseen, still guarding a door that no human eye would approach until the 20th century. When Carter saw them, he was not merely looking at objects. He was looking at figures still performing the purpose for which they had been made. That is what makes them so moving. They had not failed in their stillness. They had kept their post. In time, the doorway between them was opened. Beyond it lay the burial chamber. Unlike the antechamber, the burial chamber had painted walls. Their colour must have felt startling after the plainer spaces outside. The wall paintings were not as extensive as those in some larger royal tombs, but they were deeply important. They showed ritual scenes connected with the king's burial and transformation. The background was golden yellow, warm and luminous, and the figures stood in formal profile, moving through the sacred language of Egyptian art. One scene showed the king's funeral procession or related funerary imagery. Another showed Ai, his successor, performing the opening of the mouth ceremony on Tutankhamun's mummy. This ritual symbolically restored the senses of the deceased, allowing the dead person to breathe, speak, eat, and live again in the next world. In Egyptian belief, the body and spirit required ritual activation. Death was not merely a biological fact. It was a passage that needed words, gestures, offerings, and divine assistance. Another wall showed Tutankhamun welcomed by deities. The images were not decorations in the casual sense. They were part of the tomb's function. They helped place the king within the sacred order of the afterlife. They made visible the transition from earthly ruler to eternal being. In the center of the burial chamber stood an enormous gilded shrine, or rather, a series of shrines, one inside another. This is one of the most remarkable aspects of the tomb. The burial chamber was dominated almost entirely by a large gilded wooden shrine that filled much of the room. Inside it was another shrine, and then another, and then another, forming a nested structure around the stone sarcophagus. The chamber itself was not large, so the shrine filled the space with a sense of golden enclosure. It was as if the king had been placed inside a sacred house, and that house inside another, and that inside another, all within the mountain. The shrines were covered with religious texts and protective imagery. Their surfaces carried meaning. Their doors, panels, and decorations formed part of the ritual protection around the king. The idea was not simply to hide the body physically, but to surround it spiritually with words, gods, symbols, and sacred architecture. For the excavators, this created another slow challenge. They could not simply reach the king. They had to remove, record, and study one protective layer after another. The first shrine had to be examined, then opened, then the next, then the next. Each stage required care. The wood was ancient. The gilding could be fragile. The panels were large and difficult to maneuver in the confined chamber. The chamber walls were painted and had to be protected. The work demanded planning, patience, engineering, and conservation. Again, the discovery slowed. The public image of Tutankhamun's tomb often jumps from Carter's candle to the golden mask, but between those moments lay years of labour. The mask was not simply waiting in the first room, ready to be lifted into fame. It lay deep within layers of protection, in a coffin, inside a coffin, inside a coffin, inside a stone sarcophagus, inside gilded shrines, inside a painted burial chamber, inside a sealed tomb, inside the valley, layer within layer, silence within silence. When the outer shrines were opened and removed, the stone sarcophagus was revealed. It was made of quartzite with a lid of red granite. Its form was solemn and strong. The sarcophagus was not as visually dazzling as the golden treasures around it, but it carried a different authority. Stone speaks differently from gold. Gold glows. Stone endures. Inside the sarcophagus were the coffins. The outermost coffin was gilded wood, shaped in the form of the king. It presented the pharaoh in the idealized form of Osiris, arms crossed, holding royal and divine symbols. The face was calm, not a portrait in the modern sense, but a sacred image of kingship and eternal life. Inside that was another coffin, also richly decorated, and inside that, a third. The innermost coffin was made of solid gold. This is one of the reasons the tomb captured the world's imagination so completely. The amount of gold was astonishing, but again, the gold was not merely wealth. It was theology in material form. It suggested the imperishable, the divine, the solar, the eternal. The king's body was not simply stored. It was transformed into a sacred presence through materials, images, names, and ritual coverings. The famous golden mask rested over the head and shoulders of the mummy. Today, it is one of the most recognizable objects ever found in Egypt. Its calm face, striped Nemes headdress, inlaid eyes, and delicate workmanship have become almost inseparable from the idea of ancient Egypt itself. But in the tomb, it was not an isolated museum masterpiece. It was part of the burial. It covered the mummy. It belonged to the layered protection of the king's body. It was intimate, sacred, and functional within the ritual world of the tomb. To see the mask only as treasure is to miss much of its meaning. It is a face made for eternity. Not the tired or injured face of a young man who died suddenly, but the perfected face of a king who had crossed into the divine realm. Calm, symmetrical, serene, beyond ordinary time. The mask does not show sleep exactly, but it has a sleep-like stillness. The eyes are open, yet peaceful. The expression is neither smiling nor stern. It belongs to a world where stillness is not emptiness but permanence. This is why the mask feels so powerful in a bedtime history. It is not loud, it does not move, it does not need action, it simply remains. Around the body, within the wrappings, were amulets and jewellery placed for protection. The mummy had been carefully prepared according to the practices of elite Egyptian burial. Though the body itself suffered damage over time and during removal, the burial arrangement tells us much about the beliefs surrounding royal death. Amulets could protect different parts of the body, spells could guide the deceased, names preserved identity, images connected the king with gods. The body itself mattered because Egyptian afterlife beliefs required continuity between the physical remains, the name, the shadow, the ka, the ba, and other aspects of personhood. The tomb was a system designed to keep these connections possible. For a modern listener, some of these beliefs may feel distant, but the human desire beneath them is not distant at all. The desire to protect the dead, the desire to remember a name, the desire to send someone onward with what they might need, the desire to believe that darkness is not final. These feelings appear in many cultures, in many forms. The Egyptians expressed them with extraordinary material richness. but the emotional root is recognizable. Tutankhamun's tomb touches people because it is both foreign and familiar. Foreign in its rituals, gods, royal symbols, and ancient worldview. Familiar in its care, its objects, its young life ended early, and its long preservation against forgetting. As Carter's team moved deeper into the burial chamber and its nested protections, the tomb became increasingly complex. The work required not only excavation, but interpretation. Many objects bore inscriptions. Some names had been altered. Some items may have been made originally for other royal figures and adapted for Tutankhamun. This has led scholars to examine the politics and pressures of the period after Akhenaten. The Amarna period had disrupted traditional Egyptian religion. Akhenaten had focused worship on the Aten, changing the religious and artistic life of the court. After his reign, there was a movement back toward older gods, especially Amun. Tutankhamun's own name reflects that shift. The boy king's reign became part of a restoration, whether directed by him personally or by powerful advisors around him. In the tomb, this historical tension appears quietly, not as an argument, but as traces, names, objects, styles, reused materials, ritual choices. The tomb is therefore not only a burial, it is a document from a period of transition. But the tomb does not explain everything. It never has. It gives evidence, but evidence must be interpreted carefully. That is another slow lesson. The past rarely offers complete certainty. It offers clues, patterns, probabilities, and debates. Even a tomb as rich as Tutankhamun's leaves many questions unanswered. How exactly did he die? What was his daily life like? How much power did he personally hold? Which objects were made especially for him? Which were borrowed, repurposed, or modified? How quickly was the burial assembled? What did the mourners feel as they sealed the tomb? These questions remain partly open, and that openness is not a failure. It is part of the way history breathes. A closed answer can be useful, but an unanswered question invites us to stay with the past a little longer. In the treasury, another room of the tomb, the excavators found some of the most sacred and mysterious objects of the burial. The treasury lay beyond the burial chamber and contained shrines, statues, model boats, containers, and the canopic shrine that held the king's internal organs. These organs, removed during mummification, were preserved and protected separately, guarded by divine figures. The canopic shrine was especially beautiful. It was gilded and protected by 4 goddesses, their arms outstretched in gestures of care and protection. The image is deeply moving, divine women surrounding what remained vulnerable, holding the king's physical being within a circle of guardianship. Protection is one of the central moods of the tomb. Not fear, protection. The tomb protects the name, the shrines protect the coffin protects the body. The amulets protect the flesh, the goddesses protect the organs, the statues protect the doorway, the mountain protects the tomb. The seals protect the silence, and for more than 3,000 years much of that protection worked. The treasury also contained a statue of Anubis, the jackal god associated with embalming and the necropolis, lying atop a shrine. Anubis belonged naturally in such a place. He watched over the dead and the processes that prepared them for the afterlife. In the dimness of the tomb, the black figure of Anubis must have seemed both elegant and solemn, another guardian in a house of guardians. There were model boats too. Boats were essential in Egyptian life and religion. The Nile was Egypt's great road, and in myth, gods and the dead travelled by boat through the sky, the underworld, and sacred landscapes. To include boats in the tomb was to provide movement. Even in death, the king would travel. This is a beautiful thought for a sleep story. The dead king, wrapped and protected, surrounded by boats for journeys through unseen waters. The sun god travelling through the night before dawn. The soul moving through darkness toward renewal. The tomb is still, but its meanings are full of movement. Silent movement, ritual movement, the movement of a boat under stars. In the annex, another small chamber, the objects were more disorderly. This room had been disturbed by robbers, and its contents were crowded and chaotic. There were jars, baskets, food offerings, containers, and everyday materials. The disorder tells its own story. Ancient thieves had searched quickly, officials had repaired and resealed, but not restored everything to perfect order. The annex reminds us that the tomb survived not as an untouched ideal, but as a real place with a real history of intrusion. Even so, its survival was extraordinary. Many royal tombs in Egypt had been almost completely robbed. Precious metals disappeared. Mummies were moved. Coffins were stripped. Objects were broken or scattered. Tutankhamun's tomb, by contrast, preserved an enormous amount of burial equipment. Its small size, location, accidental covering, and early resealing all contributed to this survival. There is humility in that. The most famous Egyptian tomb did not survive because it was the grandest. It survived partly because it was overlooked, because debris covered it, because later workers built above it, because robbers did not empty it completely, because time, accident, and neglect formed a kind of shelter. History is often preserved by chance. A manuscript survives because it is copied one more time. A city wall remains because it is reused as a foundation. A tomb survives because rubble hides its stairway. A name survives because it is carved on something no one thought important enough to destroy. Tutankhamun became famous not because he was the greatest pharaoh in life, but because his burial survived in death. That fact gives the story a gentle strangeness. The young king who might have remained obscure became the face of ancient Egypt to much of the modern world. Not through conquest, not through a long reign, but through silence. Through being hidden, through waiting. As Carter and the team continued their work, they encountered not only beauty but difficulty. The tomb's contents were fragile. The climate inside changed after opening. Human presence, light, air, and handling could all affect ancient materials. The team had to improvise methods of conservation in difficult conditions. They used chemicals, supports, wrappings, and careful transport to preserve objects as best they could. Each object removed from the tomb changed the tomb. This is one of the paradoxes of archaeology. To study a site, one often has to disturb it. Excavation is controlled destruction. Once a layer is removed, it cannot be put back exactly as it was. Once an object is moved, its original context is gone unless it has been carefully recorded. That is why documentation matters so much. The tomb of Tutankhamun became famous for its treasures, but its excavation records are treasures too. Photographs, notes, plans, object cards, drawings, descriptions. They preserve the tomb as it was encountered, not only as individual objects in museum cases. For the sleep rhythm of our story, we can imagine those records being made at a table in soft light. A page, a pencil, a hand moving slowly, an object number written down, a description formed, measurements noted, the scratch of pencil on paper, the rustle of a notebook, a pause to look again. This is history becoming legible, not in a rush, not all at once, but line by line. The tomb's objects tell us about royal life, religious belief, craftsmanship, and international connections. Materials came from different sources. Techniques show specialized labor. Decorations reflect myths and rituals. Weapons and chariots show royal imagery. Furniture reveals comfort and ceremony. Games suggest leisure. Food containers suggest provision. Clothing and sandals suggest the body, movement, and daily use. One of the most intimate aspects of the tomb is the presence of objects associated with childhood or youth. Tutankhamun was not an old king. He died around 18 or 19. His reign was brief. His burial contains royal grandeur, but also the sadness of a young life enclosed too soon. The tomb is magnificent, but it is also small. Its richness does not erase its youthfulness. There is a quiet sadness in the golden rooms. Not dramatic sadness, not loud grief, a still sadness, the kind that sits in objects, a small chair, a garment, a bed, a game, things made for a life, then gathered for an afterlife. The ancient mourners who prepared the burial may have felt a mixture of urgency, ritual duty, political concern, and personal grief. We cannot know their private emotions, but we can see their work. They did what the tradition required. They placed, sealed, wrapped, and protected. They sent the king into the next world according to the beliefs of their time. The tomb is therefore a record of love, duty, power, and theology all at once. That combination is why it continues to draw people in. It is not simply that gold survives, it is that care survives. If you look beyond the shine, you can feel the hands of artisans shaping wood, the hands of embalmers wrapping linen, the hands of priests handling ritual objects, the hands of workers carrying furniture down the corridor, the hands of officials pressing seals into plaster, the hands of robbers breaking in, the hands of officials repairing the damage, the hands of carters' workers clearing the stairway, the hands of photographers adjusting equipment, the hands of conservators stabilizing fragile surfaces. Across 3,000 years, the tomb is a story of hands touching and protecting, disturbing and repairing, opening and recording. As the burial chamber was studied, the painted walls offered another layer of quiet instruction. Egyptian tomb art is often misunderstood if we think of it as simple illustration. It is more than a picture of events. It participates in the events. A painted offering can sustain, a written name can preserve, a ritual scene can make ritual presence continuous. The walls are not passive, they are active in the tomb's sacred purpose. This is why the colours matter. The golden background of Tutankhamun's burial chamber has a warm, almost glowing quality. In soft light, it must have felt like an enclosed sunrise. The figures are formal and still, but they suggest movement through ritual. The dead king received, transformed, welcomed. The chamber is small, yet the paintings open it into a cosmic journey. A tomb is underground, but its images connect to the sky. A body lies still, but its texts describe travel. A sealed room is dark, but its surfaces are filled with solar hope. The ancient Egyptians did not deny darkness. They organized a path through it. That is a powerful thought at night. The sun disappears each evening. The world grows quiet. The body rests, dreams come. And then, in the morning, light returns. For the Egyptians, this daily rhythm was sacred. The sun god's nightly journey through the underworld was dangerous but necessary. Renewal required passage through darkness. The tomb of a king placed that cosmic rhythm around a human death. Tutankhamun, the young king, was buried in the west, in the Valley of Sunset inside the earth, surrounded by objects and words meant to carry him toward rebirth. In a bedtime history, we can let that idea remain gentle, not as doctrine, not as argument, simply as an ancient way of seeing night. Night as passage, darkness as protection, sleep as a small echo of renewal. The discovery of the tomb allowed modern people to enter that ancient imagination more fully than ever before. Because so much remained, the tomb gave scholars and the public a rare view of royal burial equipment in context. It showed how many objects could accompany a king. It showed the richness of craftsmanship. It showed the layering of shrines and coffins. It showed the relationship between ritual and material culture. It also changed the modern image of Egypt. Before the discovery, ancient Egypt was already admired and studied. But after 1922, Tutankhamun became a global phenomenon. Newspapers followed the story. Designers borrowed Egyptian motifs. Jewelry, furniture, fashion, architecture, and film absorbed Egyptianizing forms. The world became fascinated not only by Egypt as a scholarly subject, but by Egypt as mystery, glamour, and dream. This fascination had both positive and problematic sides. It brought attention to Egyptian antiquity, but it also encouraged fantasy, exaggeration, and sometimes disrespectful myths. The so-called curse of the pharaohs became a popular obsession, especially after Lord Carnarvon died in 1923. Newspapers turned coincidence, illness, and ancient superstition into dramatic stories. The idea of a curse made the tomb seem dangerous and sensational. For our channel, and for this calm bedtime story, we do not need to dwell in that sensational version. The real tomb is more interesting than the curse. The real story is not a horror story. It is a story of preservation, a story of patient work, a story of a young king, a hidden burial, and a world suddenly able to look into a sealed chamber of the past. There is mystery enough without fear. There is wonder enough without exaggeration. The quiet truth is stronger than the loud myth. Inside the tomb, the work continued. Objects were removed over multiple seasons. The process was long and demanding. Each season brought new stages, new challenges, and new revelations. The burial chamber itself required years to fully clear. The mummy and coffins posed particular difficulties. The shrines had to be dismantled. The sarcophagus opened, the coffins separated, the mummy examined. These moments were not simple. The resins used in the burial had hardened, causing materials to adhere. The innermost coffin and mummy were difficult to separate. The body had suffered from the effects of the embalming materials and later handling. What the public imagines as a clean, perfect unveiling was in reality a complex and sometimes difficult conservation challenge. This reminds us again that ancient survival is not the same as perfect preservation. The tomb survived extraordinarily well, but time had still done its work. Wood had aged, textiles had weakened, resins had hardened, organic materials had changed. The mummy had not remained untouched by physical processes. The miracle of the tomb is not that time stopped completely. It is that enough survived to let us see. Enough colour, enough form, enough gold, enough names, enough objects, enough arrangement, enough silence. That is often what history gives us. Not everything, but enough. Enough to imagine carefully, enough to study, enough to wonder. In the treasury, the small golden shrine containing the canopic equipment stood beneath the protection of goddesses. Their outstretched arms are among the most graceful images from the tomb. They do not feel aggressive, they feel sheltering. They seem to gather the sacred contents into a circle of care. This motif fits the entire burial. Care around vulnerability, layers around the body, words around the name, gold around decay, the mountain around the chamber. In the afterlife beliefs of ancient Egypt, the dead were not simply gone. They had needs, dangers, transformations, and destinations. The tomb served as a point of connection between worlds. Offerings could be made, names could be spoken, images could function, the dead could endure if properly sustained. For a pharaoh, this was especially important because the king's eternal existence was connected to cosmic order. But even non-royal Egyptians, in their own ways and according to their means, sought preservation, remembrance, and afterlife security. Tombs across Egypt, from grand to modest, reflect this desire. Tutankhamun's tomb is royal and extraordinary, but it also belongs to a broader human tradition of preparing the dead. A person dies. The living gather what matters. They choose clothing, objects, words, prayers, songs, symbols. They create a place. They close it. They remember. Across cultures, the forms differ, but the tenderness of preparation is familiar. This is why, beneath all its gold, the tomb can feel intimate. It is not only a monument to power, it is a room of farewell. As the third part of our story moves toward its close, let us picture the tomb not as a museum display, but as a sequence of quiet rooms under the rock. The antechamber, crowded and dim, the guardian statue standing at the sealed door, the burial chamber, golden-walled and filled by shrines, the treasury protected by Anubis and goddesses, the annex crowded with jars and provisions. Each room has its own mood. The antechamber feels like astonishment, the burial chamber feels like solemnity, the treasury feels sacred and guarded, the annex feels practical, crowded, almost domestic. Together they form a small universe, not a palace, not a temple open to the sun, a hidden universe for one young king's eternity. Outside, the Valley of the Kings remains stark and quiet. The cliffs do not reveal what they contain. From above, a tomb is just an entrance, a cut, a patch of ground. The treasures are not visible. The painted walls are not visible. The nested coffins are not visible. The young king is not visible. The valley keeps its secrets by appearing almost empty. That contrast is beautiful. A bare valley above, a golden world below, sunlight outside, candlelight inside, wind over stone, silence around a royal burial. The more we slow down with the story, the more we can feel that contrast. In the modern world, the objects from the tomb would eventually be seen by millions. The mask would become iconic. The name Tutankhamun would become one of the most famous in all of ancient history. But in the moment of discovery and excavation, the tomb was still a place of closeness. A limited number of people moved through it. Objects were still where they had waited. The rooms still belonged partly to the dark. It is worth remembering that before fame, there was stillness. Before the exhibitions, the photographs, the headlines, and the souvenirs, there was a sealed door in a valley. Before the mask became an icon, it lay against the mummy of a young king. Before the tomb became a global story, it was a hidden chamber of belief, grief, and protection. And before Carter's candle revealed wonderful things, the tomb had no audience at all. Only the guardians, only the sealed shrines, only the objects waiting, only the silence of the mountain. This part of the story has taken us inside the deeper rooms. We have moved from the guardian statues to the burial chamber, from the shrines to the sarcophagus, from the coffins to the mask, from the treasury to the intimate objects of daily and sacred life. But we have not yet finished. There is still the question of what the discovery meant for Egypt, for archaeology, for the modern imagination, for the young king's memory, and for the way the past can return softly after sleeping beneath the earth. For now, let the image settle. A small painted chamber under the western cliffs, golden walls in lamplight, a shrine inside a shrine, a stone sarcophagus, a golden coffin, a calm face made for eternity. Outside, the desert night gathers again. The heat leaves the stones, the stars appear over the Valley of the Kings, the work lamps are lowered, the notebooks close for the evening, the tomb is secured, the guardians, whether in the chamber or in memory, remain standing in the dark. And the young king, no longer entirely forgotten, rests at the centre of a story that has opened slowly, layer by layer, like a dream being remembered after a very long sleep. The fourth part of the story begins after the opening, after the stairway, after the sealed doors, after the first glimpse of wonderful things, after the guardians, the golden shrines, the painted chamber, and the young king resting at the centre of his hidden world. Now the story widens. It moves outward from the tomb itself, out into the valley, out into Egypt, out into the newspapers and museums and imaginations of people far away. But it also moves inward, toward the quieter question beneath the gold. Why did this discovery matter so much? Not only because it was beautiful, not only because it was rich, not only because the mask was dazzling, or the shrines were golden, or the tomb had survived in a way few royal tombs had survived. It mattered because for a brief moment in modern history the ancient world seemed not entirely lost. It seemed near, close enough to be seen by candlelight, close enough for dust to rise from a sealed floor, close enough for a name half forgotten to become familiar again. Tutankhamun, the young king, had slept in the valley for more than 3,000 years, and when his tomb was opened, he did not return through a great battle, or a royal decree, or a monument built to impress the living. He returned through small things, a step, a seal, a narrow corridor, a candle flame, a room crowded with objects, and then, slowly, object by object, note by note, photograph by photograph, the tomb became part of the modern world. This was not a simple process. The discovery of the tomb created excitement almost immediately. News spread with astonishing speed for the time. Newspapers wanted updates, visitors wanted access, scholars wanted details. The public wanted images of gold, kings, curses, secrets, and the mysterious life of ancient Egypt. The tomb had been quiet for centuries, but once opened, it became surrounded by noise. This is often what happens when silence is found. The world rushes toward it. But inside the valley, the work remained slow. The team had to continue clearing the rooms carefully. Objects had to be preserved. Many had to be strengthened before they could be moved. Fragile surfaces had to be protected. Chariots had to be dismantled and studied. Boxes had to be opened with care. Jewellery, textiles, furniture, weapons, vessels, and ritual objects had to be catalogued. The tomb became a school of patience. Every day required attention to detail. Every object, however small, had its own history. A bead could matter, a seal impression could matter, a scrap of linen could matter, a label, a fragment of wood, a painted line on a box. All of it belonged to the total story. When people imagine ancient Egypt, they often imagine the grand things first: pyramids, temples, colossal statues, royal masks, obelisks under the sun. But the tomb of Tutankhamun reminds us that history also lives in the small scale, in the curve of a chair leg, in the weave of a piece of linen, in the dried remains of food meant for a journey, in a pair of sandals, in a game board, in the careful decoration of a chest that might once have been opened by servants, officials, or the king himself. The discovery gave the modern world something rare, not just a single masterpiece, but a room full of relationships, objects next to objects, sacred beside practical, royal beside intimate, ceremony beside daily life. This is why the tomb is still so compelling. It allows the imagination to move slowly, not just toward the king, but around him. Who made these things? Who carried them into the tomb? Who chose what should be placed there? Who sealed the doors? Who returned after the robbery to restore order? Who stood in the valley when the last light of the burial day faded? The ancient workers are mostly unnamed. Their hands shaped the tomb, but their names did not become famous. The goldsmiths, carpenters, painters, stonecutters, weavers, embalmers, priests, guards, porters, and scribes all contributed to the burial. Some worked for the palace, some worked in specialised communities near the royal necropolis. Some followed instructions passed down through generations. Some may have been tired, hot, worried, proud, or simply focused on completing a task correctly. History often preserves the name of the king and forgets the names of the hands. But in A Quiet Story, we can remember the hands too. The hand that polished gold leaf until it caught the light. The hand that painted a blue line along a piece of furniture. The hand that tied a cord. The hand that folded linen. The hand that pressed a seal into wet plaster. The hand that placed a small object in a box and closed the lid. The hand that carried a lamp down the corridor. The hand that made the final gesture before the tomb was sealed. When Carter and his team entered the tomb, they met the work of all those hands. They did not meet the makers, but they met the traces of care they had left behind. And then, in the 20th century, another set of hands began the work of recovery. The hand that brushed dust from a surface. The hand that adjusted a camera. The hand that wrote an object number. The hand that steadied a fragile chair. The hand that lifted a small amulet into better light. The hand that closed a notebook at the end of the day. Across time, the tomb became a conversation between hands separated by millennia. One group prepared the king for eternity. Another group tried to preserve what eternity had left behind. As the excavation continued, Tutankhamun's fame grew far beyond the valley. The discovery came at a moment when newspapers could carry images and stories across the world. Readers in Britain, America, Europe, and elsewhere followed the unfolding drama. They wanted to know what had been found, what the objects meant, what the tomb looked like, and what would come next. Ancient Egypt entered popular culture with renewed force. Fashion borrowed Egyptian lines and motifs. Jewellery took inspiration from lotus flowers, scarabs, falcons, and geometric forms. Architecture and interior design sometimes adopted Egyptian themes. Films, novels, advertisements, and stage designs used images of pharaohs, tombs, and golden mystery. The world was not only studying Egypt, it was dreaming Egypt. This wave of fascination is sometimes called Egyptomania. It was not entirely new. Europe had been fascinated by Egypt for a long time, but the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb intensified it. The tomb seemed to offer everything the imagination wanted: a lost king, a hidden chamber, gold in the dark, ancient rituals, and a sealed doorway opened after thousands of years. But fascination can distort as well as illuminate. The public did not always want the patient work of archaeology. It often wanted mystery, danger, and romance. The so-called Curse of Tutankhamun became one of the most famous myths surrounding the discovery, especially after Lord Carnarvon died in 1923. His death, caused by complications following an infected mosquito bite, was turned by newspapers into something more dramatic. The idea of a curse spread quickly. It was a powerful story: a tomb opened, a pharaoh disturbed, a patron dead, a warning from the past. But the curse story tells us more about modern imagination than about ancient Egypt. It shows how easily people turn uncertainty into drama, how quickly newspapers can turn coincidence into legend, and how strongly the public wanted the tomb to be not only historical but supernatural. For Bedtime Past Stories, we do not need the curse. We can let it pass quietly. Because the real tomb is already full of mystery without becoming frightening. There is mystery in the survival of the stairway, mystery in the sealed door, mystery in the young king's short life, mystery in the religious changes of his time, mystery in the objects reused or adapted for his burial, mystery in the unanswered questions about his health, his death, his court, and his final days. There is no need to make the darkness hostile. The darkness of the tomb was protective. It was the darkness that kept colour from fading quickly, the darkness that sheltered wood, linen, gold, and paint, the darkness that preserved the stillness until the modern world arrived. In that sense, the darkness was not a curse. It was a blanket, a covering, a long night around a sleeping king. And when the tomb opened, the task was not to defeat the darkness, but to enter it gently enough that what it had protected could survive the light. This is a useful way to think about history itself. The past does not always come to us in clear daylight. Often it comes from darkness, buried, broken, incomplete, half understood. We bring lamps to it. We look carefully. We try not to damage what we find. We accept that some things remain shadowed. We learn slowly. The story of Tutankhamun's tomb is therefore not only an Egyptian story, it is a story about how human beings meet the past, with curiosity, with desire, with mistakes, with care, with imagination, with impatience, with awe. Sometimes we want the past to answer every question, but the past is not obligated to become simple for us. It gives what it gives. The tomb gave more than anyone expected, but it still did not give everything. We still do not know every detail of Tutankhamun's life. We still debate aspects of his family, his health, his politics, his burial, and the reuse of objects. We still interpret the evidence with new methods, new questions, and new caution. That too is part of the story. A discovery is not finished when the door opens. It continues as long as people keep asking better questions. After the tomb was cleared, studied, and documented, its objects entered the care of Egypt's antiquities authorities and museums. The treasures became central to the world's understanding of ancient Egyptian royal burial. Over time, exhibitions of Tutankhamun's treasures travelled and drew enormous crowds. People stood in lines for hours to see objects that had once rested in silence under the western cliffs. The golden mask became more than an artifact. It became an image, a symbol of ancient Egypt, a symbol of archaeology, a symbol of beauty surviving time. But symbols can become so famous that they hide the quieter truth behind them. When we see the mask reproduced on posters, books, documentaries, and souvenirs, it can become almost too familiar. We may forget that it was once not an icon, but a sacred object resting against a wrapped body in a small tomb. We may forget the dust, the sealed doors, the careful notes, the smell of old stone, the crowded rooms, the fragile boxes, the tired workers, the valley cooling at sunset. So tonight, let us try to remember the mask not only as a museum object, but as part of a place, a small chamber, a nested coffin, a young king, a burial made by ancient hands, a discovery made by patient hands, and a silence that lasted longer than most civilizations. Tutankhamun himself remained strangely close and distant. Close because his tomb preserved so many personal and royal objects. Distant because the boy behind the gold remains partly hidden. We know he came to the throne young. We know he lived during the aftermath of the Amarna period. We know his name changed from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, reflecting the restoration of Amun's importance. We know he died young. We know his burial was rich but smaller than the burials of many more powerful kings might have been. We know his tomb survived in unusual condition, but much about his inner life is lost. What did he think when he performed rituals in the temples? What did he feel as a child king surrounded by advisors? Did he understand the political and religious weight placed upon him? Did he enjoy hunting, games, music, ceremony, or quiet moments in palace gardens? Was he frightened by illness? Did he know death was near? We cannot answer with certainty, and because we cannot answer, we should not pretend. A calm historical story must know when to leave silence in place. That silence is not empty, it is honest. We can imagine carefully, but we should not claim too much. We can walk around the evidence. We can describe the world that shaped him. We can follow the objects that accompanied him. We can sense the outline of a life. But the full person remains partly beyond us. Perhaps that is why his tomb is so haunting. It gives us so much material detail, yet the young king himself remains quiet. The gold speaks. The furniture speaks. The seals speak. The painted walls speak. But Tutankhamun, the person, remains still. And so the story becomes not a complete biography, but a meeting with absence. A golden absence. A preserved absence. A name returned from the valley, carrying more questions than answers. As the years passed after the discovery, archaeology itself changed. The excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb became a landmark not only because of what was found, but because of how much attention it drew to archaeological method, documentation, conservation, and cultural heritage. Later generations would bring new standards, new technologies, and new ethical concerns. Today, we ask questions earlier archaeologists did not always ask. Who owns the past? Who gets to interpret it? How should human remains be treated? How should artifacts be preserved? How should museums tell stories without turning ancient people into spectacle? How do we respect the dead while studying them? These questions matter. The tomb of Tutankhamun belongs to Egypt's heritage. It is part of the land, history, and cultural memory of Egypt. The modern story of its discovery cannot be separated from the politics of the early 20th century, when foreign archaeologists, wealthy patrons, colonial power structures, Egyptian officials, and local workers all played roles in how discoveries were made and controlled. A gentle story should not ignore that complexity. But it can hold it quietly. It can acknowledge that the tomb's modern discovery was not only a romantic adventure, but also a historical event shaped by power, money, law, media, nationalism, and changing ideas about heritage. Egyptian workers made the excavation possible. Egyptian authorities had a decisive role. Egyptian heritage remained at the center. The valley was not an empty stage for foreign adventure. It was and is part of Egypt. To remember that is to make the story more truthful. And truth, in bedtime history, does not have to be harsh. It can simply be clear. The objects found in the tomb also remind us how interconnected the ancient world could be. Egypt was not isolated. Materials, ideas, styles, and diplomatic relationships moved across regions. The New Kingdom was a period of international contact, with connections to the Near East, Nubia, the Mediterranean, and beyond. Royal courts exchanged gifts, materials travelled, artisans worked with imported goods. The tomb's richness reflects not only Egypt's internal culture, but its place in a wider world. Even in a sealed chamber, the world was present. Wood from distant lands, stones and metals from specific regions, artistic ideas shaped by court culture, symbols rooted in religious tradition, objects made by specialists who participated in networks of labour and supply. A tomb is hidden, but it is made from connections. That is another quiet truth. No monument is made by a king alone. No royal burial is made by a single hand. Behind every golden object is a chain of people and materials: miners, traders, transporters, scribes, administrators, craftsmen, supervisors, priests, and labourers. Behind beauty is organisation. Behind ritual is work. Behind eternity is daily effort. This is why the tomb can teach us about life, not only death. It teaches us about woodworking, metalworking, weaving, painting, storage, transport, religion, administration, trade, and social hierarchy. It teaches us that ancient Egypt was not merely a land of symbols, but a society of skilled labour and practical systems. The afterlife required logistics. The sacred required supplies. The king's eternity required schedules, workshops, food, tools, and people carrying things down a corridor. There is something almost comforting in that. Even the most sacred objects have a practical history. Someone had to make them. Someone had to move them. Someone had to decide where they went. Someone had to clean the space. Someone had to seal the door. In this way, Tutankhamun's tomb connects the cosmic and the ordinary. The sun god's journey through night, and a worker lifting a basket of rubble, the transformation of a king into an eternal being, and a carpenter joining two pieces of wood, the protection of the dead by goddesses, and a scribe writing a label. History lives in that meeting place. As we move toward the end of the story, let us return to the Valley of the Kings, not to the day of discovery, but to the valley after the world had learned the name again. The valley did not become less silent because newspapers wrote about it. The cliffs remained cliffs. The sun still rose sharply over the desert. The ground still held heat by day and released it by night. The entrances of tombs still opened into stone. Tourists would come, of course. Scholars would come. Guards, guides, conservators, officials, photographers, and visitors would come. But beneath all this human movement, the valley's older mood remained. A valley of sunset. A valley of hidden doors. A valley where kings were placed under the mountain, not to be seen, but to endure. If you stand there in imagination at dusk, the place becomes soft again. The harsh noon light fades. The cliffs turn gold, then rose, then grey. The paths grow quiet. A breeze moves fine dust across the stones. The sky deepens. Far away, the Nile Valley holds its green darkness, fields and palms and water reflecting the last light. Here, among the dry hills, the tombs rest in shadow. Tutankhamun's tomb is smaller than many would expect. Its fame is enormous, but its physical space is modest. This contrast is one of the most beautiful parts of the story. The world made the tomb vast in imagination, but the tomb itself remained compact, intimate, almost humble compared with the grander tombs nearby. a small tomb, a young king, a great survival. That is enough. Sometimes history does not need scale to become meaningful. It needs a point of contact, a place where time feels thin, a doorway where the ancient world and the modern world nearly touch. Carter's candle at the doorway became such a point. The golden mask became another, the guardian statues became another, the sealed stairway became another, each as a threshold in memory. Tonight, as the story settles, we can think of thresholds not only as entrances but as gentle transitions, day into night, waking into sleep, present into past, known into unknown, breath into quiet, a sealed door into a chamber, a story into a dream. This is why the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb belongs so naturally to bedtime history. It is a story of darkness opened carefully, a story of patience rewarded, a story of objects sleeping under stone, a story of light entering slowly, a story of a young king whose name returned softly after a very long night. Before we close, let us walk once more through the story in the calmest way. The valley is still, the morning is cool. Workers clear the ground below the tomb of Ramses VI. A step appears. More steps descend beneath the rubble. A sealed doorway waits. Carter sends for Carnarvon. The site is covered again. The valley waits. Carnarvon arrives. The stairway is cleared. The first door opens. A corridor packed with debris leads inward. Basket by basket, the corridor is cleared. A second sealed doorway appears. A small opening is made. The candle flame trembles. Carter looks in. Shapes emerge from darkness. Gold catches the light. Wonderful things. The antechamber is crowded with couches, chariots, boxes, jars, and silent forms. Guardian statues stand by another sealed doorway. Beyond them lies the burial chamber. Golden walls, painted figures, a great shrine, another shrine within it, and another, a stone sarcophagus, nested coffins, a golden mask, a young king wrapped for eternity. Around him are amulets, words, gods, symbols, and offerings. Beside him and beyond him are rooms of objects, practical, sacred, royal, intimate. The tomb is recorded. Objects are photographed. Notes are written. Fragile things are lifted with care. News spreads. The world becomes fascinated. Myths grow. Scholars study. Questions remain. And through it all, the valley keeps its silence. This simple sequence is enough to carry the mind gently. Step, door, corridor, door, candle, room, guardian, shrine, coffin, mask, silence. Each word could be a breath. Each image could be a small lamp in the dark. Step, door, corridor, door, candle, room, guardian, shrine, coffin, mask, silence. The repetition is restful because the tomb itself is built on repetition and enclosure. One layer after another, one protection after another, one slow movement inward. And now, as we prepare to leave the tomb for the night, we do so in reverse. We step back from the golden mask, back from the coffins, back from the sarcophagus, back through the painted chamber, past the guardian statues, into the antechamber, where objects glow softly in memory. Back through the corridor, up the steps, out into the valley. The night air is cool, the cliffs stand under the moon. The sand has lost the heat of the day. A few stars gather above the western hills. The entrance is quiet. The tomb is quiet. The story is quiet. There is no need to solve everything before sleep. The young king can remain partly mysterious. The ancient prayers can remain partly distant. The painted figures can keep their formal stillness. The golden mask can rest in the mind as an image of calm endurance. The unanswered questions can wait until morning. That is one of the kindnesses of history at night. It does not demand that we hold everything tightly. It lets us drift among fragments. A candle, a map, a valley, a sealed door, a name, a face of gold, a sky full of stars above Egypt. For a moment, imagine the tomb before it was ever found. The stairway still buried, the antechamber still dark, the guardian statues unseen, the shrines closed. The young king wrapped and silent. Above him, centuries move like slow clouds. Empires rise, empires fall, languages change. Travelers cross deserts, cities grow, ships sail, machines are built, wars pass, museums open, children are born and become old. The world changes again and again, but beneath the valley the tomb remains. It does not hurry, it does not explain itself. it waits. And perhaps that is why the story is so peaceful in the end. The tomb teaches slowness. It teaches that not everything precious is immediate. Some things remain hidden for longer than we can imagine. Some answers sleep beneath ordinary ground. Some names return only after thousands of nights. Tutankhamun's life was brief. His reign was not the longest. His power may not have been the greatest, but his tomb became a bridge between ages. Through it, millions of people have felt the nearness of ancient Egypt. They have seen the care of artisans, the beliefs of priests, the hopes of a civilization, and the strange survival of beauty inside darkness. The tomb did not give us the whole of Egypt. No single discovery could, but it gave us a roomful of time, a roomful of gold and wood and linen and stone, a roomful of questions, a roomful of silence, and sometimes a roomful of silence can speak very gently. Now the valley is fully dark. The last light has left the ridges. The moon rises higher, pale above the cliffs. The old paths are quiet. In the distance, the Nile moves through the night, carrying its silver line between fields and villages. The river has seen kings come and go, temples built and broken, boats launched and forgotten, songs sung and lost. It keeps moving, as it always has. The desert does not move in the same way. It rests, it holds, it covers, it preserves. And under the western hills, the memory of Tutankhamun's tomb remains, not only as a discovery, but as a long, calm passage through time. If you're still awake, let the images become softer now. The candle at the doorway, the dust in the beam of light, the gold shapes appearing slowly, the dark guardian statues, the painted chamber, the quiet face of the young king, the valley under stars. Let each one drift past without effort. There is nothing more to chase tonight. The tomb has been opened, the story has been told, and the past, like the desert after sunset, can settle again into peace. So let the valley grow still, let the sand cool, let the candle burn low, let the old book close gently, let the name of Tutankhamun rest in the dark, not forgotten now but calm. And as the night deepens, let the ancient world fade into a soft distance, where golden chambers, silent statues, and moonlit cliffs become part of a dream of Egypt, a dream of history, a dream of a young king sleeping beneath the western mountains, while the stars keep watch above the Valley of the Kings.